Hello and welcome to episode 49 of the Mark and Me podcast. As always, I'm your host Mark, and I actually can't believe it's episode 49. We're so close now to the big 5-0, and this is meant to be a bit of a side project. As you know, my other podcast, Skip to the End, is the bi-weekly movie podcast, and for some reason now, Mark and Me has become a bi-weekly podcast, filling in that nice gap that Skip to the End leaves every other week. So it's been very busy, but while the episodes keep coming, I'm going to keep recording and I'm going to keep releasing them all. So if you'd listened to the episode only 1 week ago, I was joined by Brad Moore, the upcoming actor who started his acting life a little late, and the feedback has been fantastic, and that's all I can ask for, you know. People are tuning in now for the less known names as well as the big celebrities, and I'm very grateful for that, and that's what I've kind of worked for. And it may have taken nearly 50 episodes, but it's nice that people are tuning in for everyday people, and like I said, not just those huge names that draw people's attention. So on today's episode, I'm going to be talking to the director of Gloves Off, Steve Nesbit, and I'm absolutely thrilled that he's joined me today because he's only actually got 5 films under his belt, and I first saw North vs South, and most recently I saw Gloves Off, and I think this guy has a huge talent, and he actually began his career in wildlife photography, so then to move into actual cinematography and directing, I think it's a huge jump, but he's done it absolutely seamlessly. And honestly, when you see Gloves Off, some of the choreography and some of the fight scenes that you see, especially in the boxing ring itself, is unbelievable and up there with some of the best, and I think he's got a huge future ahead of him, and I'm excited that he's on today's show. Before I get into that, I do want to thank everyone that listened to the Brad Moore episode. He's retweeted it, he's been reading all the comments, and he's blown away by the response, and so am I, so thank you all for taking the time to listen. But let's get into today's episode. So here's me talking to Steve Nesbit, the director of the film Gloves Off. So Steve, thanks for joining me today on the Mark and Me podcast.
Very welcome. It's lovely to be here.
I've done a bit of research into your background and realised that you used to do a lot of photography, especially in wildlife. Before that, was there a time in your life that you knew you wanted to be the man with a camera in your hand?
I did, but it was never in my universe. I mean, I grew up in an incredibly rural part of the country, and into a family where your aspiration would be just to get a job, leave school at earliest possible opportunity and get a job. So in the sort of vein of Plato's Cave, that was my influence. There was never any sort of ambition to do anything other than be employed when I left school. But throughout my school career, I was able to write stories, and I'd entered a few, or teachers had entered a few competitions with little bits and pieces that I'd written, and although they were sort of incredibly enthusiastic about it, I wasn't particularly, as I said, because I didn't really understand that world or think it even existed. However, my diet of particularly comedy and horror sort of was drawn to the extreme genres when I was growing up, was absolutely insatiable. I mean, I loved any television and film comedy, and in a time where there was non-linear editing and digital effects and so on. One of the things I liked to do best when I was growing up and playing around as a child was to create special effects for myself. And so I would learn, I'd get science magazines to learn how the effects for Indiana Jones was done, or Raiders of the Lost Ark was done, and this kind of thing, because they were all cutting edge. And I suppose in doing those things and enjoying and sort of understanding rules of drama and all that kind of thing, it just sort of happened organically, and it wasn't until later on that I actually started to learn about lens craft. But I think the storytelling came before camera work did, really.
So it sounds like you're a big fan of the practical effects. I mean, one of my favourite films is John Carpenter's The Thing, and I always look at that as how well it was done, and it always looks a lot better than CGI. Is that something you're a big fan of?
Absolutely right. It's the problem we have, well, we have many problems with cinema these days, but one of the biggest problems I have with cinema these days is such that because we can gorge now on anything that we want, and the digital effects palette means that there is anything that you can imagine can be put on a screen, and whereas it was a visual treat to watch, films like Star Wars and all those that required process photography and incredible discipline to make. We don't have that now. And what's happened is we've become a little bit drunk with it, and that's become the spectacle. The spectacle has become so easy, and the folly at the expensive end of filmmaking, the studio end, is that we'll put some car crashes in and spaceships or whatever it is, the big spectacles, and that'll make this work. But it absolutely doesn't, because combined with particularly using the example of The Thing, and of course John Carpenter, who was he did an amazing apprenticeship with Halloween and all the rest of it before he got onto The Thing, had those skills as a storyteller, which were then implemented in practical effects. So you had to have that passion and that addiction to storytelling before you could get to play with the practical effects, and that meant that you put as much love and attention into those because they were part of your story. Whereas I do feel now you just get a kind of throttle jockeys almost in post-production, just sprinkling fairy dust on things, and the story is neglected. We don't love the characters as much as we did.
And I think people's attention spans aren't the same. You get these films in the cinema doing well now, an hour and a half. A lot of people wouldn't dream of doing a 3-hour film now and really storytelling.
Well, no, I'll tell you, the last 2 films I did, I was told absolutely unequivocally 1 hour 30 minutes, and that's that. And Gloves Off is a great example, because I actually shot 2 films. It's such a great ensemble cast, and it was such a great shoot that, when you get that kind of treat, you're a fool if you don't make the most of it. And I just shot and shot and shot and shot, and there's so much improvisation going on, and and I made the most of that. But when it got to editing, my first director's cut was just shy of 3 hours long.
Wow.
Which obviously, with trims would still have made it about 2.5 hours just to get something palatable. But the producers, the entire production company had said to me at that point, "You're going to have to get this down to an hour and a half." And I said, "Well, what about 1 hour 50? 2 hours I don't think is unreasonable for a film this size and all the rest of it. An hour and a half, or we can't sell it." And that was it. That is the mentality. And again, that is another problem that we've got with film in Britain. Not necessarily the duration, but the fact that everybody's trying to work to formula as opposed to doing what's in their heart. And because of our lack of foothold in the distribution, that is a big, big problem for us here. And it's one of the reasons why independent film in Britain is really struggling.
So you talked about obviously watching these things as a lot younger and kind of recreating them, which is great. And did you have like a Super 8 camera or some, what was the sort of equipment you were using?
No, I couldn't afford one.
No.
Back then we had very little in my house. But what I used to do, and it sounds pathetic now, is I used to get an old reflex camera, and I couldn't record it and I couldn't photograph it, but I would just make that event happen. So if I got hold of like different types of candles, different colours of candles, melt the wax down, and then sort of layer them one on top of the other to something that looked like, I don't know, sort of a multicolour. You remember Morph, the
Play-Doh,
claymation character? I'd make something like that out of wax and try and make a face out of it or whatever, and then melt it with a blowtorch, and just watch it melt. And that was my sort of Nazi officer looking into the Ark of the Covenant. And unfortunately, I couldn't record it for prosperity because I couldn't afford a cine camera or a video camera or anything like that. But I would just watch it through a lens and pretend that was on the big screen. Amazing. Such is the imagination of youth, But I do. But the thing is, I mean, it's risible now, but necessity is the mother of invention. And I do think it forces, even now, I remember speaking to Mark Boone Jr., I don't know if you know him, from Batman and Sons of Anarchy and stuff, and he was talking about Christopher Nolan and saying, he said, that guy works every film like it's a low-budget film. He pushes harder, he lifts higher and all the rest of it. And I thought, well, that's wonderful, because, he's making these massive budget films. But I thought, that's how it should be as well. I think for a director to be in that privileged position, to be doing such a great job, and when it's going, it's just the most wonderful experience. You should be putting that much effort into it. I think if you're not, then you should step aside and let somebody else in with a bigger passion than you.
That's why I've got so much respect for people like Peter Jackson, Christopher Nolan, Del Toro. They still look like they've got the passion and they want to create it using toys, but on a scale that's Hollywood money.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I always say to people when asked, because, as you know, it's incredibly difficult to get anything made. It's just incredible. I mean, you're more likely to win the lottery than you are to get a film made. Yeah. And that requires you to dig, incredibly deep. And when people say, well, how do you get to do that? And the answer is, I don't think anybody actually knows. You just do what you can. But what the driving impetus I find is that I can't not do it. So if somebody was to say tomorrow, like all your projects are on hold, you're not doing anything for a year, you have to just sit in that room for a year. Well, what would I do? I'd write more scripts. And I would, find ways to make stories happen because I don't know how not to do it. I can't not tell those stories. I can't not be a writer-director. And, whatever I may do in life, it will always harken back to that, and it's that addiction. And I think if you need that addiction to succeed, and those guys who've been incredibly successful, they have it. They might not be the most fun at a dinner party because it'd be quite a dorky conversation, Yeah. But that's that's part of it. That's part of your makeup,
When you were then obviously successful and you would start, you weren't doing your still photography anymore and you were starting to do films and stuff, one of your big breakout films was North versus South. What was that like then? Because that's quite a big scale, and was that something, how did that come about?
Well, it's a strange thing. Originally that was a different film, and the producer I was working with at the time, I was two producers actually. The original script that I'd written was actually about a completely different subject. It was a thriller where a Romani family, a gypsy family, had moved into an old, like a hamlet in the middle of nowhere that was run by an old landowner. And these places do still exist in the North Yorkshire Moors and the North Yorkshire Dales and so on. And the story was about how this underground global gambling ring, were pitting the gypsy children against dogs and televising it for people to bet on around the world. It's kind of like what's that, Hostel sort of a thing. Where they, but this was all about gambling for hideous people. And the reason I wanted to do that was because of the irony that travelling community is still the only race on earth that it's still okay to hate and say nasty things about and all that. And it's a subject close to my heart. And so, that script was quite clever, actually, if I do say so myself, and it was quite an interesting thing. Now, when I took that to the producers and said, shall we make this? They said, oh, yes, fantastic script, but no, we won't make it because nobody's interested in this kind of thing. They want gangster films. And I said, well, it's just a saturated market.
Yeah.
There's been 1,000 gangster movies that came after the Lock, Stock, which was like a renaissance of that genre, if you like. And everybody then tried to copy it, which tends to be the case, isn't it? But that became, well, look, you can make it what you want, but if it's a gangster film, we will find a market for it, and off you go. So that's what I did. And what I did was, for better or worse, I tried to make it more of a love story than a sort of violent story, and tried to put, a different take on what had become, in my mind anyway, a pretty hackneyed genre, just to keep things interesting and, mixing it up a little bit. And some of that got lost in the edit, I think, because that was I was working with some quite, well-respected talent at that time, and the editor that I worked with was very celebrated editor, BAFTA winner, I think, actually, Kim was. So, I had to give over a certain amount of control to the editor and the producers as well there, because, they were quite clear, we want to make this for a market. It's not necessarily, you've got to be guided by us. And I went and I took that on board, and that's what I did. But the resulting film, I think, is great. But it would have been, let's say, a little sloppier. If I'd admired it, it was more on the side of the Romeo and Juliet and that relationship than it was But saying that, I'm not making apologies for it at all, because I think it's a lovely piece of work. It's very exciting, and all my work is about entertaining. It's not about searching for some higher truth or changing the world. I'm really not interested. I love that exists, and I love that people do it, and I think that's incredibly relevant, and it has its place. But by the same token, I have my place, which is for your regular working class person to watch something interesting and hopefully comedic on a weekend. That's my job. That's what I see anyway, is my job.
So during the filming of this, obviously you were working with Brad, and now he's in your most recent film, which is Gloves Off.
Yes.
I've been lucky enough to see the film, and I think the way that you've got the perfect mix of comedy and drama is very well done, which is, I think it's a skill, because so many people get it wrong, and you've got the perfect mix, I think, on this film.
That's very kind of you. Thank you very much.
Now, the cast itself is great, and it's a bit of the best of British comedy. So you've got Ricky Tomlinson, and I absolutely love the royal family. You've got some people from Only Fools and Horses. You've got people from The Young Ones, and it must be... I was saying earlier to Brad just about how going on set must be like a family of looking around and thinking, this is comedy gold. Literally, this is the best people you could be around.
Well, that's why I shot 2 films.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got, and also a real breadth of characters, because, starting with Ricky, because Ricky's a good friend of mine. He is absolute royalty, national, pun intended, national treasure.
Yeah.
And wherever he goes, and I've been a few countries in Europe with Ricky now for various different bits and pieces, and he's recognised everywhere he goes, and never, ever does he turn anybody away. And that's just who he is. And in the green room, when we would have the set being prepped, and I would spend time on there prepping the set, making sure everything's okay, and then go and chat to the guys in the green room who were waiting to go on about what we were about to shoot and all that kind of thing, I would have to wait for Rick to finish his anecdote.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you would say. Look, we've only got another hour till blah, blah, blah. Hold on a minute. And he will do that all day, every day. But the great news there is, once you get that onto a set, and you can channel that, and you can work with him, as an incredibly talented artist, it's an unlimited tap. You've got a bottomless well of brilliance. Not as much as we would have liked had made into the film, only because of the way editing works. It's a very cruel thing, and sometimes if your plot point isn't in the right bit, you have to jettison that which you would like to include in the film. It's just bad luck, really. But one of the things I've tried to do since, as an aside, by the way, is I am working on Ricky with a number of other things to get more of that, more of that essence out. But so you've got Ricky at that end, and then you have Paul Barber, who is possibly, I have never met a more lovely, gentle soul in my life. Paul is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful man, and I absolutely adore him, as does everybody around him. But his deadpan is the most admirable thing in the world. You think you've got, he looks at you sort of blankly while you're rehearsing, and you think, he's not taking this in. It's not going in. What, give me something back, and he'll just nod quietly, and yeah, I've got it, no problem. And then on action, he absolutely floors everybody. And Paul also, I think because he's that way in his nature, he's able to bring out this incredible pathos as well.
Yeah.
And Paul, they're all underrated. You could shoot so much more. But then there's Alexei Sayle, who is just bonkers.
Yeah.
But as a human, he's, incredibly erudite, well-read, intelligent human being who could, lose and find me with most of his sort of academic knowledge. He's a very, very clever fella. And yet, and again, you call action, and he'll pull his trousers down and show you his ass. And that I just think that's brilliant. You can have somebody that's so complex and, very, very clever individual who will be very happy to make an audience laugh. And I think for me, that's why comedy is king. It's just, it often gets frowned upon by sort of more highbrow, particularly in film circles and, I call the Guardian readers and so on. But if you get it right, I just think it's the most brilliant gift to be able to share with the world. And even Denise, to sort of go for the four extremes, if you like, says says the most outrageous things for comical effect. And what Denise used to like to do was to corpse everybody right before action. So the call goes when you're about to shoot something. The first assistant director will call to turn the camera over and start shooting. And then the sound will say I'm running and I'm at speed and all that sort of thing. So we know we're ready to go. And then there'll be a couple of seconds before he calls action. So that whole process might take 5 seconds before you're ready to go. In that 5 seconds, Denise would think of the most excruciatingly, painfully inappropriate thing to say, just in time for the first to shout action. And then everybody would have to recover and play the scene, without corpsing. And honestly, another really intelligent human being, that's kind of really underrated. She had a lot of fun. She was a lot of fun to work with. But again, I think playing the character that she did, she absolutely nailed it. Bang on the money. Really nice to have her around.
We haven't seen her on screen for a while either. I was it's nice to see some of these faces back on screen, reminding you why you love them so many years ago.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, again, there's the trend at the moment in our sort of social media-based world doesn't really integrate too well with, the days of yore, because things fall out of fashion. I mean, like everything, things fall out of fashion. But what I really like, rather than somebody who, I can't think of anybody offhand, not that I should probably name anybody anyway, but what I really like about this collection of characters is that they can all make comedy without making anybody a victim.
Yeah.
So it was never aimed at an individual that takes all the pratfalls, which is fine, but when I think the entire comedy routine works around that, there being a victim or somebody to take the piss out of or whatever, I don't think that is anywhere near as talented as somebody, like Ricky Tomlinson, who can walk into a room and entertain everybody, at the drop of a hat with no notice. I was recently really lucky to work with Johnny Vegas as well, and he did exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
You can just...
It's just natural, isn't it?
Yeah, funny bones, we call it, don't we?
Yeah.
And there's no sort of nastiness to it. And I think a lot of the modern... I sound like a bit of a Luddite here, and I don't mean it that way, but I think the modern sort of comedy trend requires some body to poke fun at.
Yeah, there needs to be a victim, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think that's as nice.
No.
That's all I can say, really. It has its place. I'm not saying that's terrible, but for me, a film like Dubbed Off, which is a family film, you don't want that. You don't want to always be, pointing at somebody and saying that's wrong or whatever it is. It's better if people can subvert the comedy onto themselves or the situation. I think is wonderful. Like Will Ferrell must be the king of that, surely.
Yeah, definitely.
At the moment, yeah.
So looking forward, now that you've done this film, it's out, what's your kind of future looking like? Is there something you want to get involved in, a different genre, or people you want to work with?
Yeah.
Massively, yeah.
There's a lot. The trouble that we have as filmmakers now is, without going on a big tirade about what's wrong with the film industry, but to surmise that, the British independent film industry is very much on the decline. I mean, I would be incredibly surprised if anything was being made at all after the next sort of 2 or 3 years, to be honest. I mean, films, low-budget independent films that are getting made now are more commissioned works of art than they are an actual commercial product, and that means it's not sustainable, so it'll go. And that means that a lot of people are looking towards television, because the production values in television now, it's pretty much the same as those of cinema.
Yeah, look at Netflix and Amazon Prime right now. The amount of exclusives they do to themselves, and the scale is just out of this world.
Absolutely incredible. So you've got a lot of filmmakers who've never been in television, like me, who now think, well, actually, that's probably what I should be doing. I should be looking at television, because that's obviously what the future is. And of course, I could make a fantastic job of it, because you can have repeating characters and so on, which is a real privilege to be able to do. So, I mean, I've got projects set up in the US that that would be film projects, and I'd be very, very happy to do those. But as far as the UK is concerned, I think it's more about television, really. I've got a couple of projects that I'm sort of partway through. One of them is a wonderful comedy about a woman who is raising money to start a business. Incredibly intelligent woman, but she's got no social airs. And she meets an eccentric investor who challenges her to learn to ride a horse to a competition standard in order to get the remainder of her investment money. And that's the setup. And it's by a wonderful book by Josie King. And I've written a screenplay for that, and I'm about to start packaging that up with a view to making that film in the UK. And I've also got another really left of centre film that was there's a producer I work with a lot. In fact, line produced both North vs South and Gloves Off, called Carl Hall. Carl is a very, very gifted ideas man. He doesn't really have the patience to fulfill a whole screenplay because he's a very successful line producer and he's working on massive projects. So I've picked a couple of those off him that I'm developing. One of them particularly, which can be made, it's a very, very low budget and would be better for being a low budget, which is absolutely hilarious. And it revolves around a game show host. And I can't really go into the details of that one because it's such a novelty. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. Incredibly funny and needs a massive star attached to it, even though it's tiny budget. So
yeah,
it's something that the film appears as a live. So it's like a telethon, if you like. So the hour and a half that it's on screen, the majority of that would be an hour-long show, if you see what I mean. So
I get it.
Yeah,
that sounds good and nice and original.
It's incredibly original. He pitched that to me. When we did first started North vs South, so what's that? That's maybe 4 years ago or something. And at the time, I remember saying to him, just hold on to that because we'll come back to that. And sure enough, we did. It's just, as you said, incredibly original, but it's not original for the sake of being original. It's like, it's worth it, and it's incredibly funny. Really takes a swipe at, tabloid talk show hosts, or tabloid talk shows altogether. Takes a lovely, satirical swipe at those, and of the lynching on social media and all that stuff. So there, although it's slapstick comedy, it does have a little bit of substance to it underneath, which everybody, I think, will, when they see it, will look at themselves and go, yeah, okay, I do a bit of that. I'm not going to do that anymore.
I'm really excited now, and I'm kind of intrigued on who you'd cast, because that's going to need the right person to carry that.
Yeah, there are a couple of people.
Who would be your dream? Who would forget reality? You could have anyone.
Well, the trouble is, if I could have anyone, it would be more about just working with a certain talent.
Yeah.
So, I have ambitions to work with certain talented actors, and I think on that or any other project, I would love to work with Will Ferrell.
Yeah.
Because I think he's the man of a generation, frankly. I think he's just incredibly underrated. He and John C. Reilly, I think, together are just wonderful. But I think, playing the role of, because he's so duplicitous, this character, is probably, in his prime, Jim Carrey. Yeah. I think he'll be far too busy to be entertaining low-budget scripts in the UK at the minute. But I think if I could have anybody there, it would probably be Jim Carrey.
You never know.
It's true. You never know. I mean, one of the things is we've designed it so that you only need one really huge name, and the rest of the people involved, the rest of the characters, although there are quite a lot of them, they don't have as much screen time and they don't need to be big names to sell it. You just need one, and that is part of the architecture to get the thing made. Because what people don't appreciate is when you go about making a film, there's this kind of fallacy that you just have this great idea and then you make it happen. But unfortunately not. You have to approach the idea such that some people will buy into it, and the right people will buy into it. You can, get it into distribution and all the rest of it. So there is, it's quite, every film that you'll see is quite a contrived thing. I don't think the days are around anymore where you have these sort of auteur directors that could do whatever they want. I mean, I'm sure if, Robert Zemeckis or Well,
Spielberg, yeah.
Do what they want, but I'm talking about, little old me. Well, I can't do that, I'm afraid. I've got to find something that's attractive to the people at the top table.
My final question for you today is, for those people that are getting into the film industry, the more people I speak to, it's very varied, this answer, but what advice do you give to those people that want to kind of be a director and get into this business? Because, like you said, it's getting tougher and tougher, and in a few years' time, indie film will be... It's going to be tough to get over the line. So what advice do you give to those people?
Practically, I would say to those people, this is a really boring answer, but it will serve you well. Have an alternative means of income. Yep. So don't rely on being a director to pay your bills, because
it ain't going to happen.
It won't happen though for however long, and that is the reason that most people fall out, because life gets in the way, as we all know. So be able to earn money doing something else. And secondly, ask yourself truly and honestly, am I an addict? So that addict that I talked about earlier on, if you are not that addict, don't do it, because it's not worth it. There's a lot easier ways to get by.
Yeah.
If you are that addict, and that is you, and I'm describing you that can't leave it alone, then don't stop. Because, as Pete Townsend once said, the true artist will do anything to get their stuff seen, and they don't care about, whether they're going to make millions or they're going to be famous and all that stuff. They're not bothered. They just want their art heard. And it's the same with film directors.
Yeah.
If that's in you and you want it and it's in your blood, just get it into, you've got how many mediums now online to be able to, how many platforms rather, to be able to get your stuff there. So even if, the first thing you make, you're never satisfied with anything you make, so keep making. Just keep doing it and have 10 ideas on the go at once and keep going, because people will cut you down. People will say that's crap. Don't do what you're doing, wasting your time, and just learn from it. Don't do what people tell you to do. Just do your stuff better.
So you think that's a boring answer, but it's very real and it's very honest, and I think people that are listening will find that much appreciated, to be honest.
Listen, it's like coming where I come from, into a, impoverished family in the middle of nowhere, northern England, and get to make a few movies and all the rest of it, and other wonderful things I've been lucky enough to do. If I can do that, then anybody can.
So there it is, and as I said on the start of today's episode, a guest that I was thrilled to have on, because I think he has a huge future ahead of him. And yes, it's great to have these massive directors on like Kevin Smith and Neil Blomkamp, etc., but I also like talking to the people that are making a name for themselves in the industry, and people like Tom Payton and the upcoming actors like Mike Beckingham, and obviously Steve Nesbit as a new director. They're the people I love to talk to, because they have stories about getting into the industry, and it's quite an eye-opener of how much work it takes to actually get into the industry and make a name for yourself. And that's what I want to do more of. And 2019 is already shaping up to be a great year, and I've got some incredible interviews to launch the year with. But I did want to end on a high. So, as we're at episode 49, I'm not going to give away the next guest on episode 50, but it's a big one, and I'm very, very excited. And what I want to do is give it to you before Christmas. So that's the biggest hint I can give you about when it's coming out. Stay tuned on markandme.com, because on there's my Twitter, my Facebook, my Instagram, and my emails. I'll be dropping hints throughout the week. But yeah, it won't be long now, and you'll have episode 50 with you very soon.